The first sign that something profound is changing doesn't come from the sky. It comes from within your chest. A strange silence settles between one thought and another, as if the entire universe were waiting for the next move of your consciousness. You try to repeat the old methods, affirmations, visualizations, intentions, but nothing vibrates the same. The quantum leap doesn't announce itself through miracles, but through a disconcerting pause where logic seems to lose its ground. In that invisible interval, the mind surrenders to the mystery of pure observation, and the energy begins to reorganize. When the observer becomes so present that he no longer looks for signs, the field responds in perfect synchrony. The universe is not distant. It mirrors in real time the frequency of your lucidity. There comes a moment when the seeker becomes exhausted. It's not physical fatigue, but a weariness of the soul before the apparent silence of the universe. You've tried to affirm, to visualize, to vibrate at the right frequency. You've read about energy, about quantum physics, about the power of thought. And yet there are nights when everything seems mute. It's as if the cosmos had turned off the sound and you were speaking into a space without echo. No sign, no coincidence, no answer. Only the return of your own effort, reverberating within yourself. This is the territory where many give up, and paradoxically, where the quantum leap truly begins. Because the void is not punishment. It is the field being purified of the noise of expectation. The mind, conditioned to associate response with immediate results, interprets silence as rejection. But the universe doesn't operate in linear language. It responds in coherence, and coherence doesn't arise from wanting hard enough, but from being whole. When the vibration of intention is crossed by anxiety, the field cannot decipher the command. It's like trying to tune in to a radio station filled with static. The sound exists, but it's distorted by the hurry to hear. The void is the most honest laboratory of consciousness. It exposes what was still belief disguised as faith. It shows how much the attempt to manifest mixes with the fear of failure. It also shows how much the desire for control still infiltrates even the subtlest spiritual practices. The mind wants results because it fears its own silence, and that fear generates a frequency that contradicts what the heart claims to desire. When the universe seems not to hear you, in truth, it is mirroring with mathematical precision the field of incoherence between intention and vibration. There is a rigorous beauty in that mirror. It doesn't judge, punish, or delay. It merely reflects. And in that reflection lies the key. The silence of the universe is, often, the echo of your own inner noise. The apparent absence of response is, in fact, an invitation to purification. An invitation to observe the space between one thought and another, between one expectation and the present moment. The quantum leap doesn't happen while you're trying to force reality to change. It insinuates itself when observation becomes pure, without demand, without pressure, without urgency. The paradox is that the more you try to make the universe hear you, the more you reinforce the belief that it is deaf. It's like shouting into a valley and feeling frustrated because the echo takes too long to return. But the echo always returns, and it always brings back the same tone that was emitted. When the request comes soaked in fear, the return cannot be harmonious. When the intention is born of wholeness, the return is immediate, because there is no gap between the emitter and the field. The universe doesn't respond to words, but to the coherence that sustains them. At this point, science approaches spirituality in an almost poetic way. Experiments on heart coherence show that the electromagnetic field of the heart is hundreds of times stronger than that of the brain. When thoughts and emotions come into resonance, the whole body emits a stable pattern, a vibrational signature. That signature is the language the field understands. The quantum leap, therefore, is not an external action, but a reorganization of internal patterns. And the void is the necessary interval for that new coherence to form. While the seeker struggles between faith and frustration, the universe simply observes, waiting for the moment when movement ceases. It is in that stillness, not in insistence, that the response becomes audible. Because when the noise of the mind dissolves, the field no longer needs to shout. It simply reflects, with subatomic precision, the state of presence the observer has reached. Silence then ceases to be absence and becomes language. Every sensation, every intuition, every subtle synchronicity begins to carry information. The universe has always spoken, but in a language that cannot be translated into words. It speaks in frequencies, and while the mind seeks confirmation, the heart already knows it is being heard. The difficulty is not in communication, but in listening. To listen to the universe is to listen to your own coherence. The apparent lack of response is the most refined training for the quantum leap. It is in this vibrational desert that consciousness learns to sustain presence without needing proof. It learns to trust a field that cannot be seen, but that responds in every cell, in every small coincidence, in every feeling of alignment that appears without warning. The void is the antechamber of manifestation, the 0 point where all creation begins. When you finally stop asking, "Why isn't it working?" and simply begin to feel what the silence wants to show, something changes. The density of the air feels different. Your breathing deepens. A sense of microscopic synchronicity begins to reveal itself in small things. The timing of a song, the movement of clouds, someone's gaze. None of it is coincidence. It is the field responding in quantum language to the moment you stop trying to prove that you believe and started, in fact, to believe. The universe has always heard you. What changes is the clarity with which you hear its return. The void is merely the fine-tuning between your request and the vibration that sustains it. When the frequency stabilizes, the answer arrives, and it never comes from outside. Control is the most sophisticated disguise of fear. It wears the garments of discipline, clarity, and spiritual responsibility, but at its core, there is always an attempt to block the natural flow of uncertainty. Those who try to control the quantum leap want to cross the portal carrying the baggage of the known. And that is exactly what makes the leap impossible. The quantum field doesn't bend to the will of the rational mind. It responds to the vibrational state of being, and the vibration of control is always tension, never surrender. Control is born from the illusion of separation. The mind believes that the universe is out there, like a machine that must be operated with precise commands, positive thoughts, correct words, exact techniques. It's a subtle form of manipulation disguised as spirituality, and the more one tries to guarantee the result, the denser the surrounding field becomes, because the energy of need is heavy, while the frequency of trust is light. That density prevents the information of the field from moving freely. The quantum leap doesn't require technique, it requires vibrational transparency, and transparency is the opposite of control. The paradox is that the attempt to control arises from the same impulse that drives evolution, the desire to understand and consciously participate in creation. The difference lies in the origin of the movement. When action comes from the fear of loss, it creates resistance. When it comes from curiosity and love of discovery, it expands. The universe does not reject effort, it simply reflects the quality of intention. A mind in coherence with the heart doesn't need to guarantee the path, because it feels that the field is already in motion, even when nothing seems to be happening. Quantum physics describes something similar. The more one tries to measure a particle's position, the less clear its velocity becomes, and vice versa. The very attempt at observation alters the phenomenon. The observer inevitably interferes with the field, and this principle, when translated into human experience, reveals something profound. The obsession with control collapses possibilities. By trying to define the how and the when of manifestation, consciousness restricts the spectrum of probabilities that could emerge. Control is the attempt to impose form on something that is still pure potential. On the emotional level, control is a way to avoid feeling. It's a defense mechanism of the psyche against the discomfort of vulnerability. But vulnerability is precisely the point where the energy for the leap accumulates. Quantum expansion requires crossing the terrain of the unknown with an open heart, and that is unbearable for a mind accustomed to certainty. So it tries to anticipate, to plan every variable, to interpret every symbol, to decode every synchronicity, and in that effort, it loses the mystery that would allow the leap itself. Surrender is not the absence of action. It's a more intelligent form of action. It is acting in resonance, not in reaction. It is perceiving the exact moment when doing turns into interference. There is a subtle line between clear intention and disguised control. Intention arises from inner clarity. Control arises from insecurity dressed as method. When intention is pure, it expresses itself and dissolves naturally into the field without generating resistance. When it is forced, it creates friction, like a wave trying to push the ocean. To understand the quantum leap, it's necessary to abandon the idea that the universe is a reward machine. It's not testing your patience or withholding answers. It merely reflects with mathematical precision the degree of coherence between your inner state and the flow of the field. If you vibrate fear and try to control the result, the field mirrors that same vibration of limitation. If you vibrate trust and surrender, the field expands, reorganizing itself to manifest what aligns with that lightness. That is the law of resonance, and it operates even when it's not understood. Many mistake surrender for passivity, but they are opposite forces. Passivity is giving up, surrender is alignment. The quantum leap requires this kind of conscious surrender where the ego stops being the strategist and becomes the observing participant. It's like the exact moment when the bird leaps from the branch. It has no guarantee that the air will hold it, but there is an instinct older than thought itself whispering that flight is natural. Control prevents flight because it wants first to measure the wind, calculate the weight, predict the landing, and in that calculation it loses the impulse of vibrational faith. When consciousness releases control, the field responds immediately, not because it decided to help, but because the vibration has returned to a coherent state. The energy that was previously trapped in the attempt to predict, plan, and ensure becomes free, and this release is felt as physical relief. Breathing deepens, time seems to slow down, and a serene confidence arises that no longer depends on external evidence. That is the point where the leap truly happens, not in the technique but in the pause between desire and acceptance. In the end, control is a misunderstood expression of love, the desire to protect one's own destiny. But the universe doesn't need to be protected. It is self-aware, self-regulating, and sensitive to the slightest change in vibration. Letting go of control is, therefore, an act of respect for the intelligence of the field. It is trusting that the same principle that moves the galaxies also moves your life, and that coherence cannot be manufactured. It only reveals itself when fear ceases. The quantum leap is not something you do. It's something that happens when you finally stop trying to command the infinite. There is a kind of pain that does not show itself in tears or visible losses. It is a subtle crack between what one wishes to feel and what truly vibrates inside. On the outside, there is hope. On the inside, a heart that still trembles before uncertainty. It is the paradox of expanding consciousness, wanting to fully believe while old parts still doubt. This silent friction is one of the most delicate stages of the quantum leap, because in it the human being learns that it is not enough to emit light. It is necessary to allow the shadow to be included in the same field of vibration. Hope and fear are not absolute opposites. They are frequencies that alternate around the same center. Fear, when repressed, does not disappear. It only changes form, infiltrating even the brightest intentions. And when that happens, the vibration the field receives is confused. The universe responds not to the phrase you repeat, but to the emotion that sustains it. Saying, "I trust," while the body vibrates, distrust is like trying to play a pure note on an out-of-tune instrument. The sound comes out, but it does not resonate in harmony. The first step is to recognize that this dissonance is not failure, but part of the process. Fear is not the enemy of manifestation. It is the raw material that needs to be observed before it turns into vibrational power. The pain arises when one tries to maintain the appearance of faith while the body screams insecurity. This effort to seem confident drains energy and creates a field of tension that the universe merely reflects back. The quantum leap does not require artificial bravery, but authenticity. The field understands emotional truth, even when it is uncomfortable. There are moments when the heart vibrates at two frequencies at the same time. One movement says go, the other whispers What if it doesn't work? This friction creates an irregular vibration that prevents the harmonic collapse of the desired reality. But this friction is also a privileged vantage point. In it, you clearly see the conflict between the mind that wants to control and the heart that only wants to trust. When fear is observed without judgment, something in it begins to reorganize. The simple act of not fleeing from the feeling of threat dissolves part of its strength. From a neuroscientific point of view, fear is not a spiritual enemy. It is a biological mechanism that tries to preserve the continuity of experience. The limbic brain, upon identifying uncertainty, activates the defense system and interrupts expansion. But when consciousness learns to observe fear without identifying with it, a kind of energetic detachment is created. The inner observer begins to perceive that it can feel fear without being fear. This is the beginning of coherence. The vibration of the field begins to stabilize when the body, even trembling, remains present. True hope is not an escape from pain, but a presence that extends through it. It is the trust born not from the absence of fear, but from lucid coexistence with it. Physics calls this superposition, the state in which two possibilities coexist before the collapse of reality. In spiritual language, it is the instant in which faith and fear dance in the same space without cancelling each other out. The quantum leap happens when this coexistence is sustained with awareness, without haste to choose a side. The heart is the organ of coherence. When it vibrates in a regular rhythm, it transmits to the body a message of safety that reorganizes the bioenergetic field. But if the heart is divided, half open, half in defense, the frequency it emits becomes irregular, and the quantum field, sensitive to this irregularity, replicates the pattern of doubt in external reality. Healing, therefore, does not come from expelling fear, but from integrating it until it becomes part of the same heartbeat that sustains hope. There is a silent practice that the quantum leap demands, allowing the body to feel everything it fears feeling. Allow the tremor, the tightness, the urge to give up. When the sensation is welcomed, the nervous system understands that it no longer needs to protect itself from it. The energy that was frozen begins to move, and it is this movement that reconfigures the vibration. Hope then ceases to be a mental effort and becomes a physical state of openness. The field perceives this openness and responds immediately, because there is no longer a contradiction between what is asked and what is emitted. It is at this point that the seeker discovers that fear does not hinder manifestation. It only reveals where the vibration is not yet coherent. The quantum leap is less about eliminating emotions and more about making them transparent. When fear is seen, welcomed and breathed, it dissolves into the very light it previously tried to block. Hope is purified. It ceases to be expectation and becomes silent trust. The universe does not demand vibrational perfection, only truth. It responds to the most stable frequency, and truth is the only vibration that does not waver. When you stop hiding fear and begin to listen to it as part of the field's language, something aligns. The heart stops fighting what it feels and begins to emit an integral presence, without tension, without masks. In that instant, hope and fear become a single energy, like the sound of two notes that finally find harmony. And it is exactly there, at that point of lucid surrender, that the quantum leap prepares to happen. You realize it in the middle of a banal gesture, perhaps when breathing more deeply, perhaps when noticing that the air does not need to be pushed to enter. It is in this kind of instant that true understanding reveals itself. Manifesting never had to do with effort. Reality does not respond to force, but to the space that consciousness creates when the attempt to control ceases. The universe does not need to be convinced. It merely replicates the degree of coherence it finds in you. For a long time, conscious creation seems like a sequence of methods, repeating mantras, visualizing, thinking positively, keeping the right vibration. But what is ignored is the noise born between the intention and the fear that it will not work. This noise is subtle, almost imperceptible, but the field perceives it. Forcing is the reflection of the mind trying to sustain on its own a process that belongs to the whole. Allowing is the instant when the ego falls silent and the flow resumes its natural direction. The energy of force carries anxiety. It seeks proof. It wants to see the result, to measure, to analyze. It is an attempt to transform the invisible into something manipulable. The energy of allowing is the opposite. It does not try, does not demand. It merely vibrates in coherence with what already is. The universe responds to the vibration of presence, not to the command of will. The quantum leap manifests when the observer stops emitting noise and begins to notice that the field is already in motion. It always was, even when he believed himself to be alone. In quantum physics, the act of observation modifies the behavior of particles. However, pure observation, the kind free of expectation, is what creates stability. When the observer desires a specific result, the field oscillates, reflecting the emotional interference that accompanies the desire. Manifestation follows the same logic. The more you try to guarantee the outcome, the more you distort the vibration. Conscious creation happens at the point of neutrality, when the mind is awake but not tense. Allowing is a form of emotional and energetic intelligence. It is trusting that the invisible process knows more about synchronicity than the mind knows about urgency. When the body relaxes and the breath aligns, the nervous system releases signals of safety that the field decodes as coherence. In this state, the heart amplifies its electromagnetic field, and the universe reorganizes around that stable frequency. To manifest, then, is not to command the field, but to attune yourself to it until there is no longer any difference between who asks and what is asked. The mind resists this simplicity because it has grown used to associating effort with value. It believes that without struggle there is no achievement, that without control there is no guarantee. But the universe does not operate in exchanges. It operates in resonance. Manifestation is not a reward, it is a mirror. And the mirror does not need to be convinced to reflect. It only needs the surface to be clean enough to let the light pass. Forcing is trying to polish the mirror in a hurry. Allowing is letting it rest until the image reveals itself on its own. The instant of true understanding is almost physical. It is as if the body understands before the mind. The accumulated tension dissolves without warning. The breath becomes natural, and a deep serenity takes the place of effort. You realize that the universe always responded, but your vibration was taking up so much space with attempts that there was no room for the return. When the pursuit ceases, the field responds, not as a prize, but as the inevitable consequence of harmony. Allowing is an active state, not giving up. It is being so present that any unnecessary interference becomes evident. Action still exists, but it is born from an organic impulse, not from fear. It is the kind of movement that does not generate fatigue because it is in tune with the flow. The body knows when action is forced. The chest tightens, the energy grows heavy. Time seems to rush. When it is action in coherence, there is lightness and precision. Everything seems to move on its own, and even the pauses make sense. This moment of total allowing is the core of the quantum leap. It happens when you abandon the desire to convince reality, to obey, and begin to listen to it as part of the same field that composes you. The universe is not outside awaiting orders. It is the vibrational extension of your own consciousness. Manifestation does not need to be manufactured. It needs to be recognized. What seemed distant has always been in a state of latency, awaiting the instant when your frequency would stop oscillating between wanting and doubting. In the end, allowing is a gesture of cosmic humility. It is recognizing that the intelligence that makes a star pulse is the same that organizes your paths. The true creator is the one who becomes a channel, not a conductor. The universe does not need human effort to move, only human coherence to express itself. When this understanding settles in, the impulse to force disappears, and in its place a full silence arises. In this silence, the field responds instantly because there is no longer any resistance between what you are and what you vibrate. The mind believes that the point of pain is the limit, the place where something must stop. But for quantum consciousness, this is the exact inflection point where everything can transform. The resistance that bothers so much is not a mistake on the path, it is the very portal of surrender. Pain, when observed up close, reveals the border between what you are still trying to control and what you need to allow to dissolve. It is there, where the body contracts and the thought insists on fleeing, that the energy of the quantum leap concentrates, awaiting the instant when you finally stop fighting it. Surrender does not begin in lightness. It begins in friction. It begins in the discomfort of realizing that the attempts to keep everything under control are becoming unviable. It is the moment when physical resistance, the knot in the stomach, the tightness in the chest, the restless mind, becomes so intense that the only way out is to let go. But letting go is not giving up. It is allowing the force that previously turned against the flow to be returned to the flow itself. It is transforming tension into movement, fear into guidance. In the quantum field, all resistance is information. It indicates where the vibration is still fragmented, where parts of your being are not in coherence with the rest of the field. The natural impulse is to push pain away, to silence discomfort, to seek distractions. But the more it is avoided, the more energy accumulates there. Evolutionary consciousness does not flee the point of friction, it crosses it with presence. The quantum leap happens in this exact gesture, looking at resistance without trying to correct it, feeling it without interpreting it, accepting that pain is not the end of the line, but the beginning of release. On the emotional plane, resistance is born from the attempt to preserve the known. Even suffering, when familiar, offers a sense of safety. The ego prefers predictable pain to uncertain expansion. Therefore, it creates stories, justifications, and reasoning to keep itself in the same pattern. Deep surrender begins when these narratives lose strength, when you realize that no mental argument is capable of silencing the soul. It is at this moment that pain, once an enemy, becomes an ally, a vibrational map pointing to the exact place where the flow was interrupted. Contrary to what many believe, surrender is not a sudden act of enlightenment, but a physical and gradual process. The body needs to learn to trust again. When you observe the point of resistance, that place that hurts, that contracts, and breathe into it without wanting to change it, the nervous system begins to register safety. The energy that was previously concentrated in defense begins to circulate. This movement creates space for vibrational coherence to re-establish itself, and the universe, sensitive to every variation of frequency, responds to this new state as if an invisible lock had been released. Surrender is also a form of biological intelligence. The body possesses an ancestral knowledge of how to return to balance, but the mind interferes with haste and fear. The quantum leap demands trusting this deep knowing, allowing the organism to reorganize while consciousness witnesses the process. It is not necessary to understand how healing happens. It is necessary to allow it to happen. The field does not demand explanations, only presence. Emotional pain, when crossed with awareness, turns into clarity. With each resistance dissolved, perception expands. The answers that seemed distant arise spontaneously, as if they were only waiting for the field to calm down to become audible. Surrender does not remove pain instantly, but transforms it into a passage. What was once an obstacle becomes a vibrational corridor leading to expansion. On the scientific level, this can be compared to the process of forced resonance. When a system is pressured by a dissonant frequency, it vibrates in tension until it finds the point of adjustment. When it finally comes into tune, all the accumulated energy converts into harmony. The same happens with consciousness. Resistance is only the vibration trying to find the right tone of its own coherence. To resist is to insist on keeping the noise. To surrender is to allow the music to flow again. The most powerful point of surrender is precisely the point of greatest pain. It is there that the old pattern unravels and the new begins to form. That is why it hurts so much. The ego dies a little each time you choose to trust. The mind tries to shout that it is dangerous to let go, but the heart, silent, knows it is inevitable. When you cross this threshold and remain present within the discomfort, something changes forever. The field reorganizes, and the universe responds with almost immediate precision. Synchronicities return, intuition lights up, and the body begins to recognize lightness as a natural state. Deep surrender is not a rational choice. It is a consequence of having resisted to the limit. When control is exhausted, consciousness finally yields. And it is in this yielding, in this point where resistance dissolves, that the quantum leap happens. External reality changes because the internal vibration has stopped fighting. What seemed like an obstacle was, in fact, the exact point where the frequency needed to be recalibrated. If this text touched you, perhaps it is because some part of you already feels this call to let go. So when you finish reading, close your eyes for a few seconds and notice where the body still resists. Breathe there, without hurry, without trying to fix it. Just feel. This is the beginning of surrender. And if this message resonated with you, like this video and write in the comments, "I choose to allow the flow." This is not a symbolic gesture. It is a vibrational declaration that the leap has already begun within you. Everything begins with a silent fracture, an instant in which something inside you breaks without making a sound, yet the entire world seems to change temperature. The body grows heavy, the breath shortens, and time gains an almost tangible density. At that point, suffering ceases to be an abstract idea and becomes a living, physical, total experience. That is where the realignment begins, not in moments of peace, but in direct contact with what hurts. Pain is the most direct portal to truth, because nothing in it can be disguised. Suffering reveals the contrast between the vibration you sustain and the vibration life is trying to establish. It shows the exact point at which you moved away from yourself. That is why it is so uncomfortable. It is the frequency of coherence calling back the consciousness that got lost. The mind tries to rationalize the discomfort, find culprits, create explanations. But the field does not speak in linear language. It communicates in sensation. And when the body hurts for no apparent reason, when the heart tightens even without a visible loss, it is the universe asking for fine-tuning. The natural tendency is to run away, to seek distraction, promise new beginnings, blame fate. But flight only reinforces the vibrational circuit that generated the pain. Suffering only transforms when it is felt without defenses. To cross it is to allow the imprisoned frequency to move again. There is nothing heroic about this. It is biological. The body was made to process energy, not to accumulate it. When the flow is interrupted, the system creates emotional and physical symptoms, signs that something needs to be released. Suffering is therefore a call to return to the flow. It arises to dissolve the mental constructions that the ego had built as shelter. Every loss, every frustration, every silence from the universe is an opportunity for reorganizing. On the energetic level, pain is vibration trying to find a new state of coherence. When you observe it instead of resisting it, the information contained in it is released. It is like deciphering a vibrational code that was repressed within your own field. From the point of view of quantum physics, this reorganizing makes sense. A system only reaches a new equilibrium when it is disturbed. Pain is that disturbance, the moment when the old structures collapse to make room for what has not yet been experienced. The mind sees chaos, the field sees reconfiguration. Matter responds to the energy that sustains it, and when that energy changes, the form must adapt. Suffering is the discomfort of this transition process, the old form resisting the new vibration that is trying to emerge. Quantum consciousness does not seek to eliminate suffering, but to decode it. By observing pain without judgment, you interrupt the cycle of resistance. The simple act of witnessing with presence alters the field because the observer is part of the phenomenon. Pain, which was once a wall, begins to behave like a portal. Each sensation, each tear, each tightness becomes a passage point into yourself. The frequency reorganizes at the very moment you stop trying to understand and begin simply to feel. Suffering is the most precise laboratory of vibrational evolution. In it, spiritual theory becomes direct experience. What was once concept, surrender, letting go, trust, takes on body. The mind stops commanding, and the heart assumes the translation of the invisible. In this space of total vulnerability, control disappears, and the vibration recalibrates on its own. There is no technique that can replace this moment. It is the intelligence of the field operating at its purest level, adjusting, realigning, healing without conscious effort. When accepted, pain changes texture. What once burned begins to pulse. The body feels but does not suffer. The mind quiets, and what remains is an almost scientific serenity, the intimate understanding that the discomfort was never punishment, only a call to return to coherence. Suffering becomes the point where the heart relearns to vibrate to the rhythm of life. It is as if, upon crossing the fire, you discovered that it did not come to destroy, but to purify what still resisted transformation. At some point you realize that suffering does not need to disappear for peace to exist. Peace arises within it, like a flower growing in hot soil. The vibration changes because the observer changed. And when that change happens, the universe responds with a synchronicity that cannot be forced. The right encounter, the exact phrase, the coincidence that makes sense. Everything reorganizes around the new frequency that was born from the same place that previously seemed like ruin. Suffering, after all, is realignment in motion. It dissolves the excess, reveals the essential, and returns the body to its original vibration. From the instant you recognize it as a key and not as an obstacle, pain loses the power to paralyze. It becomes a map, and the map always points to the same destination, the return to the full consciousness of who you are, to the natural state of coherence where the universe at last can hear you without noise. At first, the change is almost imperceptible. No different sound, no grand sign, just a slight alteration in the texture of the days. Ordinary things, the sound of water, the reflection of light on the wall, the time between one thought and another, begin to feel charged with presence. It is subtle but unmistakable. Something in the field has adjusted. The universe, silently, has begun to respond. This moment does not arrive as a sudden revelation, but as a gradual, almost scientific alignment between what you vibrate and what reality returns. Inner coherence becomes a lens, and everything begins to gain a new sharpness. What once seemed like chance begins to form patterns. What once was noise begins to sound like rhythm. The universe did not change. You changed the way you listened to it. The response was always there, but it was your own frequency that distorted the signal. The new vibration is born from within, when the energy ceases to be spent on resistance and begins to flow in acceptance. The body, once tense, becomes an instrument of vibrational precision. The breath falls into step with the environment, and perception expands beyond the surface of things. At this point, the rational mind, accustomed to deciphering, finds itself forced to witness something it cannot control. Reality begins to move in resonance with your inner state. The universe does not decide to respond. It merely mirrors. When the vibration changes, matter responds like a faithful echo. It is the law of coherence acting at its purest level. Everything that vibrates attracts similar vibrations. When your energy field stops emitting noise and begins to operate in harmony, external events reorganize to reflect that pattern. That is why, after a real internal transformation, life begins to synchronize with an elegance that defies any logical planning. Modern physics calls this the principle of resonance. Systems with compatible frequencies tend to vibrate together. When your consciousness reaches a state of clarity and stability, the surrounding field comes into tune with it. People who once seemed distant reappear. Forgotten opportunities reopen. Paths once blocked become possible. Nothing is coincidence. The universe is responding to the new vibrational signature you have begun to emit. However, this is not a process of conquest, but of listening. The universe does not speak in promises, it speaks in signs. And these signs can only be perceived when the mind ceases the need to interpret everything. The response happens in almost invisible details, in the calm that precedes a choice, in the intuition that arises without reason, in the exact timing between one impulse and another. It is the language of the field, subtle but unmistakable. The universe's response does not come as a reward, but as a consequence. When you change, the field changes with you. And this change is measurable not only in external events, but in the quality of presence. Situations that once generated anxiety lose strength. Conflicts dissolve with less effort. The body, which once carried the weight of urgency, begins to move with a lightness that cannot be faked. It is the vibration of flow replacing the vibration of struggle. This is the moment when synchronicity becomes the new language of reality. Coincidences cease to be curiosities and become confirmations. The mind tries to rationalize, it was luck, it was coincidence, but the heart knows it is not. It recognizes the pattern, it feels the alignment. The universe is merely reproducing on an amplified scale the same movement that is happening within you. When the vibration changes, even time seems to reorganize itself. What once took months now happens in days. The right people appear at the right moment, and decisions that were once confusing become evident. This is not magic, it is physics applied to consciousness. The collapse of probabilities responds to the coherent observer. The new vibration creates a new field of possibilities, and within it, everything moves with precision. But it is important to understand, the universe does not respond to reward you. It responds because you have begun to speak the same language as it does. Coherence is the language of the field. When you vibrate in presence, love, truth, and clarity, reality recognizes these codes and replicates them. The universe does not distinguish merit, it distinguishes frequency. And when that frequency becomes stable, the return is inevitable. This point marks a turning of consciousness. You stop seeking signs and begin to be the sign. The separation between you and the universe disappears. What was once a request becomes a dialogue. Every event is an answer. Every silence is instruction. Every movement is confirmation. The field is no longer outside. It pulses within the same space where thought is born. Life becomes a natural extension of your vibration. And that is why, when the universe begins to respond, what truly changes is not the world, but the way you perceive it. Everything that once was resistance becomes flow. Suffering turns into guidance. Chance reveals itself as intelligence. Synchronicity is not an exception, it is the natural rhythm of coherence. The universe has always been listening. It was you who, at last, learned to speak at the right frequency. One day you wake up and something is different, even though nothing around you has changed. The walls are the same, the sky is the same, the tasks remain unchanged, but the air feels lighter. There is a clarity in the simple act of being. No effort to understand, no urgency to change, just presence. It is at this point that reality begins to fully reflect your inner state. Lightness does not come from what happens outside, but from the coherence that settles within. The mind, accustomed to measuring happiness through results, takes time to recognize this new logic. It looks for concrete signs, wants tangible proof, but lightness is silent. It is a vibrational phenomenon. It arises when the body and consciousness come into tune, and the field responds to the newly formed harmony. Everything around seems to cooperate, not because the universe has changed its mood, but because your frequency has finally stabilized enough not to create noise. The flow, once interrupted by the anxiety to control, now moves without friction. Living in lightness does not mean the absence of challenges, but a change in the density of how you go through them. The difference lies in how consciousness reacts. What once was seen as an obstacle is now perceived as part of a greater movement. Resistance gives way to observation, and drama becomes data. The universe, which once seemed unpredictable, reveals its structure of precision. Each event arrives with a vibrational purpose, to adjust, to expand, to align. And you begin to realize that nothing is against you. Everything is in favor of the coherence that is emerging. Lightness is the natural consequence of integration. When fear has been recognized, control dissolved, and suffering understood as a key, the inner field ceases to operate in tension. The body no longer needs to defend itself, the heart no longer needs to prove anything, and energy moves without resistance. This energetic freedom translates into visible synchronicities. The right people cross your path, opportunities fit together, solutions appear before the problem. External reality merely replicates internal harmony, like a screen reflecting the exact light of the one who observes it. From a physics standpoint, this state can be understood as systemic coherence. Our system in internal balance requires less energy to maintain its structure. The same occurs with consciousness. When emotional noise is replaced by clarity, life ceases to be effort and becomes resonance. Time reorganizes itself. Hurry loses its meaning. Everything seems to happen at the right cadence, as if the universe had adjusted its clock to the rhythm of your heart. Lightness is also a kind of intelligence. It does not come from the absence of weight, but from the ability to let the weight flow. It is the understanding that emotional gravity does not need to be fought, only converted into movement. The heart learns to vibrate with greater amplitude, and what once was a problem becomes information. The same event that once caused suffering now produces expansion, because the frequency with which it is interpreted has changed. Lightness is the vibrational translation of spiritual maturity. In this state, the world does not stop testing you. It simply stops shaking you. Circumstances continue to fluctuate, but the center remains stable. Serenity becomes the axis around which everything turns. You begin to notice the hidden beauty in the intervals, the silence between two sentences, the space between one decision and another, the instant before answering. Lightness is born in these intervals, where consciousness breathes. The universe responds to this pause with the same precision with which it responds to any vibration, by reflecting back the harmony emitted. A curious phenomenon arises at this stage. Intuition becomes almost tangible. You begin to feel the flow before it happens. Choices cease to be calculated and begin to be felt. The mind tries to understand, but the body already knows. The field around you responds instantly to the micro-variations of your vibration, and reality seems to converse with you in a language beyond words. It is the peak of synchronicity, the moment when the universe stops being a setting and becomes an extension of your own field of consciousness. To live with lightness is to live in communion. The self ceases to be the center and becomes part of a larger movement. This perception brings natural humility, spontaneous gratitude. You no longer feel the need to ask life to listen to you, because you realize that life is speaking all the time, in every sound, in every encounter, in every breath. Lightness is the recognition of this constant conversation. True power no longer lies in manifesting, but in remaining transparent. The more transparent the vibration, the clearer the reflection. Reality becomes a crystal-clear mirror of the inner state. It is no longer about trying to attract, but about sustaining what already is. With each breath, you confirm alignment. With each simple gesture, the universe confirms the response. The flow continues, not because you command it, but because you embody it. Lightness is not the end of the path, it is the way the path begins to be lived. When reality mirrors your inner state, you understand that there is no longer an inside and outside, only field, a continuum of consciousness in motion. And it is in this space between one heartbeat and another that the universe whispers the simplest of truths. Everything you were seeking has already been vibrating within you from the very beginning. When vibration stabilizes, the universe ceases to be a mystery to be deciphered and becomes a clear mirror of the consciousness that observes it. The quantum leap is not a destination. It is a way of existing, a state in which presence becomes a creative force and time bends to the clarity of one who vibrates in coherence. Reality responds because you have finally learned to listen to it. If you have come this far, write in the comments, "I vibrate in coherence," so I know you made it to the end. And if this content resonated with what you feel, subscribe to continue walking with me through this journey of consciousness and expansion.